With the halfway point of patch 2.0 out now, we're finally going to be getting our second limited 5-star harmony with Sparkle. Now in this video we're going to quickly run over what her kit does and whether you should be pulling for her. Sparkle's basic attack is just your standard basic attack. It doesn't really do much damage, but it does regenerate a decent amount of energy for her. This is because one of her major traces actually increases the amount of energy you get from her basic attack by 10. So you'll be getting 30 energy back instead of the normal 20. Her skill increases the crit damage of an ally and essentially advances them forward. You can think about this as being Bronya's skill, except instead of giving damage percent, it gives crit damage. Now Sparkle's second major trace actually makes this crit damage buff from her skill last until the start of the character's next turn. Now this doesn't mean much for a lot of characters, but for those with follow-up attacks that happen outside of their turn, this crit damage buff will stay for those. Her talent does two things. First, it actually increases the amount of skill points you can have, so instead of having a max of 5, you're now going to have a max of 7. And second, it also gives all allies a damage percent buff when allies consume skill points. Her ultimate recovers 4 skill points for the team and increases that damage percent buff that we just talked about in her talent. Finally, her last major trace is a 15% attack increase for all allies, and this attack percent buff increases for the amount of quantum allies on the team. So this is just a bit of incentive to play Sparkle in a mono quantum team. So now that we kind of understand Sparkle's kit, we can go back to whether you should be pulling for her. So first of all, regardless of your account state and the characters you have, Sparkle is almost always going to be a really good pull. She's our second limited 5-star harmony, so you already know she's going to be really strong. And her kit works very similarly to Bronya, who is already one of our best supports in the game. Alright, now let's quickly talk about some of the teams that Sparkle is going to improve a lot. First of all, we have Mono Quantum. Now, Mono Quantum's a team that the community's been talking about for a while, and it really hasn't been that good because we don't have that Quantum Harmony unit yet. And Sparkle's going to fill that role perfectly. Now, she works really well with buffing QQ or Sealy because of her advance forward, because of her crit damage. And you can see from her talent that increases attack percent based on how many Quantum characters on your team that she was pretty much made with Mono Quantum in mind. Sealer and QQ are also very skill point intensive carries, so Sparkle helping out with giving skill points and increasing damage around usage of skill points is going to fit perfectly with those two DPSs. Another DPS who Sparkle's kit seems pretty tailor-made for is going to be Imbibe the Lunay. Now he did actually work with Bronya if you speed tuned him to go right before Bronya, and then Bronya would skill him back so you wouldn't be wasting too many skill points. But with Sparkle's kit revolving around giving the team skill points and converting skill point usage to damage, these two are going to work perfectly together. And if for whatever reason Danhengil's best team is not with Sparkle, she would at least make him a lot more comfy to play, as you don't really need to worry about skill point management as much. Now, like I mentioned earlier, with Sparkle's skill lasting until the target ally's next turn, Sparkle's going to be an amazing harmony unit to work with our follow-up attackers. Now, we can't talk about follow-ups without talking about Jing Yuan. Now, Jing Yuan is a unit that had a big chunk of his damage coming from his Lightning Lord, which is a follow-up attack that occurs outside of his turn, which meant Bronya couldn't actually help buff that attack since her E buff only lasts for Jing Yuan's turn, which would only buff his ulti or his skill. Sparkle also allows Jing Yuan to run attack boots without using Asta, since Sparkle's advance forward will let him keep stacking his Lightning Lord with skills until it hits 10 stacks easy. So for Jing Yuan, Sparkle is basically just a better version of Bronya. Now for our other follow-up attackers, we have drratio. Now drratio has been looked over by the community when talking about Sparkle, but he actually gets buffed quite a lot by Sparkle, especially with his hypercarry teams. Now Sparkle isn't going to work too great with the dual carry ratio Topaz team, but in a hypercarry team, Sparkle will work perfectly. In the same way she buffs Jing Yuan's Lightning Lord, she's going to buff Ratio's follow-up attacks outside of his own turn with her skill, which is going to be amazing. Now with all the other DPSs that we haven't really covered, Sparkle is still going to work perfectly fine with them. She's going to work basically as a either slightly better or slightly worse version of Bronya. And with Bronya being so strong already, you can't really go wrong with Sparkle. Now we can't talk about pulling for a character without talking about the future. Even though we've talked about how strong Sparkle is and how many teams she's going to buff, if there is a character rerun that you've been waiting for, or a penacony character that you really want, I highly recommend waiting it out, especially if you don't have Jades to spare. If this does sound like you, I suggest looking at banner leaks to see which characters will be releasing or rerunning soon, and then you can figure out if you have enough Jades to be pulling on Sparkle's banner. Now speaking of these future characters, there are actually two that we do know a little bit about, which are Acheron and Aventurine. Both of them are going to be running in patch 2.1, with Acheron being Nihility and Aventurine being Preservation. Now for what they'll actually do, Acheron is going to be a hyper carry crit DPS in the Nihility path. She's looking to be very strong with her current numbers in the beta, but she's going to have some limitations with team building, and she's also going to lack free to play light cone options. Aventurine on the other hand is going to be a shielder that also works as a sub DPS. So he's going to work exceptionally well in follow-up focused teams where he can actually output decent damage. And in the worst case scenario, he'll still be a very comfy sustain unit. Now if either of them sound interesting to you, definitely have a look at their full kits as they're currently being play tested in the beta, and you can make your decision on whether you should wait for either of them or just pull on Sparkle. To wrap up, if there isn't really a future character you have your eye on, or if you just have Jades to spare, I would definitely recommend pulling for Sparkle. She's an absolutely insane support unit that is definitely going to take our existing DPS units to the next level. Now if you do feel like you're going to have to skip her, don't feel too bad, as there's plenty of amazing supports already in HSR, like Tingyun, Bronya and Pela, and even without Sparkle you'll still be able to clear the hardest content in the game. And with that, thanks for watching, and if you are going to be pulling for Sparkle, good luck.